The evening began with a strange stillness that Emma Carter could not explain, a quiet that felt heavier than the snow clouds gathering outside their Massachusetts home, and as she moved through the kitchen setting plates on the table, she sensed that this night would not end like the others, because Daniel, her husband of 9 years, sat stiffly in his chair, staring at his hands as if they held answers he was afraid to read, and Emma noticed the way his shoulders were tense, the way his jaw tightened every time she spoke, and even before he said a word, a dull ache settled in her chest, the kind that came from instinct rather than reason, because Emma knew Daniel well, knew the signs of stress from work, knew the quiet moods that followed hard days. But this was different, this was heavier, sharper, as if he was standing at the edge of something dangerous, and when he finally looked up at her, his eyes were filled with a mix of fear and determination that made her pause mid-step. The spoon frozen in her hand, and he said her name softly, not the casual way he usually did, but carefully, like it might break if he said it too loud, and he asked her to sit down, which immediately set her heart racing, because people did not ask their spouses to sit unless something serious was coming, and as Emma lowered herself into the chair across from him, she noticed the hum of the refrigerator, the ticking clock on the wall, the distant sound of a car passing outside, all ordinary sounds that suddenly felt too loud, too sharp, as if the world was pushing in while her life quietly shifted, and Daniel took a slow breath, then another, as though rehearsing courage, and said there was something he needed to talk about, something important. And that alone made Emma's fingers curl tightly together in her lap, because important conversations had a way of changing things, and as he spoke about work at first, about long hours and pressure and expectations, Emma tried to relax, telling herself she was overthinking, that this was just another work story, but the way he spoke was different, faster, uneven, and when he mentioned his boss, Laura Whitman, Emma felt a small flicker of unease, not because she distrusted Laura, whom she had never met, but because Daniel said her name with a strange weight, as if it carried meaning beyond office walls, and as he talked about meetings, late nights, and opportunities that could change his career, Emma nodded, listening closely. But her instincts kept whispering that this conversation was not really about work, and when Daniel paused again, rubbing his hands together like he was cold, Emma felt the room tilt, because she saw the struggle in his face, the conflict between honesty and fear, and when he finally said he needed Emma to listen without interrupting, just until he finished, her heart dropped, because those words meant there would be no easy ending, and as she agreed, her voice calm but strained, Daniel leaned back, staring at the ceiling for a brief second before returning his gaze to her, and in that moment, Emma saw the man she loved looking uncertain, almost lost, and it frightened her more than anger ever could, because love built on certainty felt safe, but love built on doubt felt fragile, and as Daniel began to explain how the past year had changed him, how pressure at work had forced him to question who he was and what he wanted, Emma felt the ground beneath her slowly shifting, like sand slipping through fingers, because she realized that while she had been focused on keeping their home steady, something inside her husband had been quietly unraveling, and when Daniel spoke about ambition and feeling seen, about being understood in ways he hadn't expected, Emma's chest tightened, not from jealousy, but from the realization that she had not noticed his loneliness, and the thought stung deeply, because she had always believed they shared everything, and as Daniel's voice trembled slightly, Emma leaned forward without realizing it, drawn by love and concern even as fear grew stronger, and when he said there was a question he needed to ask her, one that might shock her, Emma's breath caught, and time seemed to slow as every possible outcome raced through her mind, from financial disaster to illness to betrayal, but nothing prepared her for the weight of his hesitation, because Daniel looked at her as if he was asking permission not just to speak, but to cross a line that could not be uncrossed, and Emma saw the man she trusted standing at the edge of something irreversible, and in that charged silence, before the words were spoken, she felt the shift happen inside her, the moment where love met uncertainty, where comfort gave way to fear, and the evening that began like any other quietly transformed into the start of a story neither of them could yet understand, and though Daniel had not yet revealed the proposal that would shake her world, Emma already knew, deep in her bones, that once he spoke, their marriage would never feel the same again. Because some questions, once asked, change everything, and as the clock ticked on and Daniel opened his mouth to continue, Emma realized that this moment, this single breath before truth, was the last moment of innocence they would ever share. Emma sat quietly, her mind racing as Daniel spoke, trying to understand the subtle tension that had built over the past year, because though their marriage had always been steady, she had noticed small changes she had tried to dismiss, like the way he lingered on stories about work, the way his admiration for his boss, Laura Whitman, seemed to carry an unusual weight, not just respect but something heavier, something personal, and Emma found herself replaying conversations in her mind, realizing that Daniel's late nights and distracted demeanor were not just from long hours but from an emotional entanglement she had never anticipated, and now, as he detailed Laura's confidence in him, the opportunities she offered, the way she believed in his abilities more than anyone ever had, Emma felt a twinge of something unfamiliar, a mixture of curiosity, fear, and protectiveness, because she had always trusted Daniel implicitly, had always believed that love meant sharing everything, yet now she sensed there was a part of him she had never touched, a corner of his heart that belonged elsewhere, even if only emotionally, and she felt a quiet ache as she listened to the way he described Laura's mentorship, her encouragement, the personal notes she sometimes sent him praising his work, and though Daniel insisted it was professional, the intensity in his voice betrayed a deeper connection, and Emma remembered nights when she had gone to bed alone while he stayed late, saying it was for projects or client calls, moments when she had felt a small pang of isolation, but had pushed it aside, telling herself it was normal in marriage to have separate spaces, separate ambitions, but now, faced with his confession, those reassurances seemed naive, almost foolish, and she realized that she had been sharing a home with a man whose emotional world had quietly expanded without her, a world where someone else's presence had begun to matter in ways that blurred the lines between admiration and longing. And Emma's heart ached as she thought of their routines, the dinners, the laughter, the quiet Sunday mornings, now shadowed by the realization that Daniel's mind had wandered into a space she could not follow, a space where Laura occupied thoughts and feelings that had once belonged solely to her, and as Daniel spoke about the promotion, the possibility of moving into a high-stakes executive role, the way Laura's guidance had become indispensable, Emma felt a knot of tension in her chest, because she understood ambition, she had always supported him, but ambition that pulled someone emotionally toward another person, even without action, was a line she had never considered, and she noticed how Daniel hesitated, choosing words carefully, measuring each one, as if afraid to let her see the full truth, and she realized that this careful pacing meant he was aware that what he was about to reveal could change everything, that it carried risk not just to his career but to their marriage, and Emma felt a flicker of dread mixed with curiosity, because she had always trusted his honesty, yet now she wondered what honesty looked like when it came with such weight, and she reflected on the times she had brushed off his late-night texts, his distracted moods, telling herself he was under pressure, reminding herself that careers required sacrifices, but now she understood those sacrifices might not have been only about work, and a subtle panic rose in her chest as she considered how little she truly knew about the emotional life of the man she had married, how easy it had been to assume that shared history guaranteed shared feelings, and she saw the irony in the way she had spent years nurturing stability while the emotional landscape beneath them had quietly shifted, and as Daniel described Laura's attention, her encouragement, the way she made him feel recognized and valued, Emma felt a wave of jealousy she had never expected, not for romance, not for physical closeness, but for the intimacy of attention, the emotional warmth that she had believed was theirs alone, and she realized that though she had never doubted her husband's love, she had underestimated the human need to be seen, to be admired, to feel understood in ways that sometimes even marriage could not fully provide, and this recognition made her ache, because it was not just about Daniel and Laura, it was about what she had perhaps neglected in herself, the quiet compromises she had made, the small silences she had accepted, the emotional spaces she had allowed to grow between them without realizing it, and she saw now that marriage, though founded on love, could also harbor secrets of the heart that were not spoken aloud, small truths that built walls silently over time, walls that even the closest partners might not notice until they were revealed, and Emma felt the weight of that realization pressing down on her, making the air in the kitchen thick and hard to breathe, as she tried to reconcile the man she loved with the man who now confessed the significance of someone else in his life, and as Daniel paused, searching for words, Emma could almost hear the clock ticking louder, each second a reminder that this moment was irreversible, that their history could not shield them from the impact of hidden feelings. And she thought about how 9 years of marriage had been filled with routine, with comfort, with shared dreams, yet now it seemed that routine had masked a quiet divergence, a separation she had never noticed, and she felt both anger and sorrow. Anger at the idea that her place in Daniel's heart might be complicated, and sorrow for the subtle loss of certainty that had defined their life together. And as Daniel's eyes met hers again, filled with a mixture of fear, longing, and confusion, Emma realized that this conversation was more than a confession. It was a turning point, a delicate, fragile moment where honesty collided with love, where trust would be tested, and where she had to decide whether to cling to what she knew or to confront the evolving reality of her husband's heart. And though her mind spun with questions, with fears, with imagined scenarios, Emma found herself listening, trying to hold on to the thread of understanding that still connected them, because she knew that love, even when challenged, required attention, clarity, and courage, and she braced herself for what was coming next, sensing in every pause, every careful word, that Daniel's revelation would demand more from her than she had ever given, more than she had expected. And as the winter wind rattled the windows softly, and the shadows deepened in the kitchen, Emma felt the first tremors of change ripple through her life, realizing that the ordinary Sunday night she had thought was safe was now the stage for a story that would test her heart, her loyalty, and her vision of love. And she knew that from this moment onward, nothing would be quite the same between them, because the emotional world Daniel had slowly opened was one she had never imagined entering. And yet, she could not look away, even as her chest tightened and her thoughts spun, because this was the life they had built, the love they had shared, and the truth, however unsettling, demanded to be faced. Emma's heart raced as Daniel's words grew heavier, his voice trembling slightly as he confessed the depth of the feelings he had developed for his boss, Laura, and though he insisted it was not physical, that there had been no crossing of boundaries, the intensity of his emotional attachment hit Emma like a wave, because she realized that love, even when unspoken, could travel invisible paths and reshape lives in ways no one could predict. And as she sat across from him, listening to the careful way he described Laura's understanding, the way she seemed to see him in ways Emma sometimes felt she could not, the room felt smaller, tighter, filled with unspoken tension and questions that had no easy answers, and Emma's mind spun, trying to reconcile the man she had married with the one who now admitted to craving the attention and approval of someone else. And the words he chose next shook her to the core. He proposed that they consider a new kind of marriage, one where they could remain together but allow him the emotional space to explore what he felt for Laura without secrecy, without lies. And the absurdity, the shock, the betrayal, all rolled into one, made her chest tighten, because she loved Daniel, had spent nearly a decade building a life, a home, a routine filled with shared dreams, and now he asked her to negotiate love like a contract, to balance her feelings against his desires, and the emotional weight was almost unbearable, because this was not a story she had imagined herself in, a scenario from which there could be no simple escape. And as she tried to speak, words stuck in her throat, because what do you say when someone you love asks you to accept a possibility that fractures the foundation of your heart? And yet, even in the midst of disbelief, Emma noticed the tremor in Daniel's hands, the quiver in his voice, the guilt that shone in his eyes, and she realized he was not cruel, he was confused, torn between loyalty to her and a longing he did not fully understand, and she saw the vulnerability behind the proposal, a man struggling to reconcile ambition, attraction, and love. And in that moment, she felt both compassion and heartbreak, because marriage had always seemed like a sanctuary, a place where love was singular, undivided, unquestionable, and now that certainty had vanished, replaced by a fragile negotiation that demanded emotional endurance she was not sure she possessed. And as Daniel spoke of not wanting to live with regret, of needing to be honest with himself, Emma felt an ache that was part sorrow, part fear, and part something darker, a grief for the years she had assumed were secure, the years where she had given her love fully without imagining that it might be weighed against another. And her mind flashed to their mornings together, the quiet dinners, the soft laughter, the small gestures that had always been theirs, now colored by the possibility that her husband's heart was partially elsewhere. And the thought made her feel dizzy, unsteady, like the floor had shifted beneath her, because the intimacy she had taken for granted was suddenly fragile, negotiable, conditional, and Emma felt a strange mix of anger, confusion, and a sorrow she could not name, for love, she realized, was more than presence, more than shared history. It was feeling prioritized, chosen completely, and in that moment, she was forced to question how much of Daniel's heart had truly been hers alone, and though she wanted to respond, to argue, to plead, the right words did not come, because every sentence she could imagine felt insufficient, inadequate to the complexity of the revelation, and as Daniel leaned forward slightly, trying to gauge her reaction, Emma felt tears prick her eyes, not from weakness, but from the overwhelming intensity of a love confronted with unexpected truth, and she wondered how easily years of marriage could be reshaped by hidden emotions, by desires that had silently grown, by bonds that had quietly shifted, and she realized that human hearts were fragile, unpredictable, and capable of longing for more than one source of connection at the same time, and as the room filled with the soft hum of the refrigerator and the faint ticking of the clock, Emma felt a storm of emotion, betrayal, confusion, sorrow, but also a deep, undeniable love that refused to let her turn away completely, because despite everything, Daniel was the man she had chosen, the man whose fears, hopes, and flaws she had come to know intimately, and even as the proposal settled heavily between them, demanding contemplation, Emma could not dismiss the sincerity in his voice, the honesty in his confession, the fact that he had brought the truth to her instead of hiding it, and in that act alone, she saw both courage and a dangerous fragility, a vulnerability that made her heart ache and her mind spin, because love was never simple, and human desire, though complicated, could not be ignored, and she understood, perhaps for the first time, that marriage was not only about comfort or routine or shared responsibilities, it was about the constant negotiation of hearts, the understanding that even those we love most could grow in directions we could not always predict, and as Daniel's eyes searched hers, waiting for judgment, for acceptance, for anger, Emma realized that this was a defining moment, one where she had to confront not only his feelings, but her own, and in that confrontation, she felt the immense weight of choice, of deciding whether to hold on to what she knew or to redefine what love could mean, and though her mind raced with fear, sorrow, and longing, she also felt a spark of clarity, the beginning of understanding that while the proposal was shocking, it was also a mirror, reflecting not just Daniel's desires, but the gaps she had ignored in their relationship, and as the evening deepened, the wind rattled softly against the windows, and the kitchen seemed suspended in time, Emma realized that this conversation, though painful and surreal, was the first step toward a truth that could no longer be avoided, a truth that demanded courage, honesty, and perhaps the hardest decision of her life, whether to reshape her love to fit this new reality or to reclaim her heart entirely. And as Daniel waited, holding his breath, Emma felt the fragile tension of their shared history, the emotional turbulence of the moment, and the unspoken knowledge that nothing about their marriage would ever feel the same again, because love, once questioned in this way, could never be returned to its former, unquestioned simplicity. Emma did not respond immediately to Daniel's shocking proposal. Instead, she asked for time, and in that silence, her mind raced faster than ever, piecing together memories, feelings, and the subtle changes she had ignored over the past year, because suddenly every late night, every distracted look, every mention of Laura Whitman, carried new meaning, and she felt both hurt and awakened, realizing that while Daniel's confession was painful, it also revealed truths about herself that she had long avoided, the quiet compromises, the emotional spaces she had allowed to grow between them, the way she had muted her own needs in favor of keeping the marriage smooth and stable. And as the days passed, Emma reflected deeply, walking through their home, touching familiar objects, seeing their life in a new light, noticing how the kitchen table they now sat at for serious conversations had been the place of countless happy dinners, conversations, and laughter, yet it now felt like a stage for fragile truths, and she began to understand that marriage, though built on love, required attention, mutual emotional presence, and that